Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to be painting a simple and fun lemon tree. Let's get right into it by sketching out the frame of the branches. I'm going to sketch out very roughly to find the rough center first, and this way it's going to be easier to erase if your tree isn't centered. And I'm also going to be drawing out the stem and branches. Though I want the main stem to be right in the middle, I want the branches to have some more weight on one side so it doesn't look too static and straight. And I want to also make sure that the stem and branch doesn't shoot straight up. I like to make a few main branches for the sketch so I know where the weight of the leaves will roughly be. I also drew out a simple pot just to know where the bottom of the painting will end up, but at the end I resketched the pot because it ended up being a bit too big for the composition, so there is space for correction, and I'm also going to draw out a few lemons to start out with so I can scatter them evenly. Next, here are the colors that I'll be using for this painting. Firstly, this is Vermilion by Holbein, Hansa Yellow Medium by Daniel Smith, Hooker's Green by Cotman, Sepia by Holbein, Chinese White by Holbein, Ultramarine Violet by MG, and Buff Titanium by Daniel Smith. I'm going to start by painting the leaves on the left section by using a mix of Hansa Yellow and Hooker's Green. I'm going to paint around the branches that I've drawn out, and I'm also thinking of ways I can frame the lemons that I've drawn out with the leaves so it falls naturally. While doing this, I'm going to leave out a bit of space between the leaves so they're not touching, because if the paint are still wet and the shape touch, the paint will travel in between those two shapes, which in turn will combine those two shapes into a big silhouette, and this will make the shapes look a bit less clear and also more flat. So I'm going to try to avoid that, and for this I'm also sticking to the left section first since I'm going to treat the leaves on the right slightly different. For the leaves on the right side, I'm going to add more Hansa Yellow in the mix, and this will just create a lighter yellow-green because I want the light to come from the right hand side. So I'm making the leaves slightly lighter here. This is going to be subtle once I add on the darker greens, but that slight difference will just give the tree a bit more form. I'm going to go back to the left section again, and I'm adding more Hooker's Green to the previous mix. This time I am creating a slightly darker green, and I'm going to paint using this dark green in between the leaves that I've already painted. If I want an even darker green, I like to also add sepia to the Hooker's Green, but it's okay if your mixes are slightly different to each other. In fact, I find that the difference in the green tones will give a bit more life to this tree. Using the same mixes in my palette in a slightly lighter consistency by adding more water and switching to my small brush, I like to add on the midrib and the veins of some of the lighter leaves for a bit of texture, but if it's a bit too hard to control the water because you do have to create those really fine lines, you can also use colored pencil for this. Next, I'm going to paint the lemons by using a thick consistency of Hansa Yellow as the base color. I'm painting all the lemons that I've drawn out so far here because I like the fact that some lemons are covered by leaves and some are still completely whole, so there's some variation with how the lemons are being placed. Once I've painted the main lemons, I'm going to paint more leaves to frame and surround those lemons. And I'm still keeping in mind for the midtone of the greens to be a bit more yellow-green on the right compared to the left side, meaning the green on the left side has more Hooker's Green in the mix. I like to also vary the shapes and angles of the leaves by making some of the leaves more thin so it looks like we're looking at it from the side, and for some to slightly curve as well so the leaves doesn't look too static. This is going to be quite repetitive since I'm basically just going to continue what I've done for the top left section for the rest of the tree, and to also continue building on the layers with the darker greens, section by section, layer by layer, while waiting for parts to dry before adding those dark greens for the overlapping leaves behind the lighter ones. I'm also going to add textures with a thinner consistency of the same color, or again you can use colored pencil for this, but basically I'm just going to jump around and fill in whichever space I feel like filling in to create a nice and lush tree. Along the way, after I've painted additional leaves, I like to also add on lemons in between those leaves, just a little bit of yellow popping out of the greens for additional color. Where the stems branch off, I want to leave space in that area, so I want to put less leaves where they're branching out. This way you can see the branch and the main frame of the tree as we paint them later on. Once all the base color for the lemons have completely dried, I use a mix of Hansa Yellow, Vermilion, and a little bit of Sepia to create a slightly reddish brown mix, and I use this to paint little dots as texture and also to form a little bit of shadows to give a rounder form to the lemons. Once you have a good amount of leaves and the tree is starting to take form nicely, you can start to figure out the main silhouette of the tree to balance out the composition, thinking about where I want the weight of the composition to be until I'm satisfied with it overall. So I'm adding additional leaves or lemons outside of the branches that I've drawn out, and I'm just extending them to make the tree larger so it can fit better within the space that I have. From the composition now, I can see that there's more weight on the top left side of the tree, but I don't want to balance this weight by adding more on the top right, or else it might look too symmetrical and I find that it'll look less natural that way. So I want to balance the weight another way by adding leaves on the bottom right side of the tree for that additional weight. So I'm just going to add more leaves and lemons there. Once I paint more leaves, there will be less space in between them, and since I want the midsection of the tree to be more dense, I like to fill in more of the gaps with the darker greens for the midsection. I feel like I have pretty good density of the leaves here, so I'm moving on to paint the branches using a thick consistency mix of sepia and vermilion to create somewhat of a reddish brown color. I'm using a thick consistency for the branches because I want them to stand out, and as for the main stem, I'm going to use a slightly thinner consistency by adding more water, and while the paint is still slightly wet, I add a thicker consistency of the same mix on the left side to give more of a three-dimensional form. I'm still trying to extend more of the tree because the pot is looking quite big, but I realized that no matter how much I add on, because the leaves are fairly small, the pot will still be way too big, so I'm just erasing it and reducing the size. And since the size will be reduced, I feel like the bottom of the painting will end too high on the paper, so I'm extending the stem downwards to keep the length of the painting to compensate for the smaller pot. For the pot, I'm going to use periwinkle blue by mixing ultramarine violet with Chinese white, and I'm going to pair this color with buff titanium as a nice neutral tone. For the shadow on the left side of the pot, I used a mix of ultramarine violet with a tiny bit of sepia to darken it, and I'm tapping my brush and also angling it randomly to create a textured effect. And here I'm just going to dry it off before I paint the inside of the pot to keep them separate. For the inside of the pot, I'm going to paint the right hand side using the dark periwinkle mix, and I'm going to paint the left side with the lighter mix, and then add an additional line at the top and the bottom of the left side to separate it from the outer wall of the pot. Using the dark ultramarine violet as well as ultramarine violet by itself, I like to use a dry brush consistency and just tap with my brush to create additional textures for the pot. Here I'm going over it again with my smaller brush to make the edges of the lines a little bit more crisp and defined. And now I'm just going to look at the tree again and continue adding on more leaves, lemons, and the texture of the leaves until I'm satisfied with the overall composition. Once all the paint is completely dry, I'm just going to erase off any pencil marks that's left. And now I'm going to finish it off by painting the cast shadow. I first wet a larger area than what I intend the cast shadow to be, and I'm just using clean water here. Then I mix vermilion with ultramarine violet and a tiny bit of sepia to mute the color slightly, and paint on a diagonal area as the cast shadow very lightly. I'm just going to let the colors flow into the wet area, but if you want to help the paint move, you can also use a clean dry brush to soften the edges, but I'm adding the pigment a little at a time until I get the right vibrancy that I'm looking for. After that, I want this to be completely dry before I add on another layer on the dry surface. So there are two cast shadows. Here I'm going to switch to my smaller brush, and I'm just going to line the edges of the pot just to define the edges a bit more. So I'm basically done, but I just want to clean out some of the edges of the leaves if they need cleaning, and also do some final adjustments to the composition and the painting as a whole. So that's it for this painting. It was super simple, easy, and quick. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like usual, all the list of tools as well as my social media links will be in the description box. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!